Low CEC, large particle. High CEC, small particle. That's all it means. It ends up affecting what you can do to the soil. But everybody understands what this means? Cation exchange capacity. Cation exchange capacity of the soil. There are certain cations in the soil that need to move back and forth between soil particle, soil solution, and root. All right? So, this is basically what that means. If you have a CEC of 10 or less in that range, you're dealing more with sand. Gravel doesn't really register on a scale. This is just for you to look at so you understand what we're seeing here. That would probably be like a 0.1 CEC. Let's just give it a number. So fair, we'll vote on that. Congratulations, gravel, you're now 0.1. Moving further, as we go down and we start adding more organic matter, we start seeing more silt, more finely eroded. The sand is broken down. It's getting into smaller and smaller particles. We are going to have a higher CEC. That number is going to creep up. Okay, that means that we have more surfaces, right? Higher CEC numbers moving above 25 indicate clay, less silt, or pure humus. All right. So when we start getting into pure humus, this number jumps from, instead of being like a 35 CEC, it's like 120 CECs. It goes way up, but we don't really register that because we're not testing pure organic matter. This is more the makeup of the soil and what its capacity to hold is. Okay, so these are the dirty and rough numbers right here. Clay has roughly 5 times the holding capacity of sand. Humus has roughly 5 times the capacity of clay. That's pretty cool. This is why I'm so adamant that you understand how important organic matter is. That's why. It's the holding capacity and the ability for that soil to buffer, hold, release, and move things through it in a better, more efficient fashion. That's where your organic matter comes into play. You guys with me so far? Everybody say, hey. Hey. All right, let's do this. What are cations? What are cations? Positively charged ions represented with the plus symbol. That's really what it is, okay? So when you start looking into these soil nutrients and you see things on your list, here's basically what you've got. Okay, this is the base saturation area of that soil test that we talked about when we look at like percentages and where things fall in the range, 65 to 75% on calcium, 10 to 15% on magnesium, we've got like 5% on potassium. We always need to have a little salt. Actually, there is an importance for a salt registration in all of this, okay? It actually is important. And sometimes you can have no salt in a soil, and that's actually not a good thing. Do you guys know why? How much do we know about distilled water? You know, if you were like in it and dropped the toaster in it, you'd be fine. It doesn't carry an electrical current, right? It can't. There's nothing that moves through it. So distilled water has nothing going on. If we have no salt in there, we have no electrical current. Okay, so there is another thing called EC. Has anybody ever, you know about this, right? You probably did some study in. Okay, so there's EC, electrical conductivity. Has anybody heard this before when referring to soil? Yeah. How about give me a meow? No, all right. So oftentimes ECs are very related to pH. So if you buy a nice pH meter like a Hanna or something like that and you're testing solutions on your own, you spend a few dollars on that thing, you can switch it to EC and it'll read an electrical current, electrical conductivity. And that typically indicates higher salt or higher nutrients. So after a fertilization, if you tested it, you would have a higher EC, a higher electrical conductivity. Okay? So all we're talking about right now is static. That's what's going on here. That's what we're looking at. And this, it's stuff that's sticking around and moving and shifting and taking that balloon and sticking it to your hair. You're just creating this opposites attract type thing, right? So we've got single cations, we've got the doubles, we've got things that have 4 different positive charges like nitrate and iron, so there's different exchanges that have to happen. So, but these are your base saturations. That's mainly what we're going to be talking about here, because that's what you see on your soil test. There are a lot more cations. Okay, if you go like, what is a cation? There's going to be like 30 things listed. You're like, well, I don't know about this, aluminum and all this other thing. You're not really too worried about it. But here it is. This is where things start to get a little important. I'm going to give you just visualizations on this thing right here. So this is sand. Let's just say that big unit is sand, and this is clay. Okay, let's just use in our brain so that you understand. Large particle, small particle. Okay? So when you consider surface area and you have a larger particle, all you have is this outside surface. If I crack it in half, I've just added a significant amount. If I crack it again, I get more and more and more, and I keep getting this out until it goes to infinity, basically, which is why, you know, Matt mentioned the surface area of whatever biochar was, what did he say? Like 2,100 square meters or something per gram? That's immeasurable, right? You can't conceptualize that in a gram. It's just invisible because there's just so many surfaces, so much porosity, okay? So in low CE soil, sand, space, there are less surfaces or nutrients to attach to. In this case, potassium and magnesium are needed in excess as they will have a weaker bond. You actually have to add more to those soils. One of the reasons that these Florida soils have low potassium, they also have low CEC. So I'm seeing that regularly. Look at some soil tests over here. Their soil is actually looking really good, but it's slightly low on potassium. But that's one reason. We have to do a little bit more of it to get these to bond to this lower CEC. Sand relies on organic matter to grab hold and hang on to cations more than its clay counterpart. Again, I'm going to sort of single out ABC over here. We were looking at some tests earlier. Their organic matter has increased phenomenally well. Many of these tests were in the 5% range. For Florida, that is a miracle. Okay, this is years and years and years. They've been with me for a long time. It's been a while. Okay, we've been running a very low NPK program and looking across and saying, oh, we only need to supplement with a half pound of potassium this year on some of these lawns. That's nothing, folks. That's nothing. But the organic matter is building up to the point where we can get everything working really, really well. There's a lot of nitrate in there, and that's what's happening in the sandy areas because it's still low CEC. We didn't have anything on there over a 10. No. So it's still sand. The sand hasn't changed. But the organic matter content is coming up, and it's actually starting to do a lot more work in the soil. All right? The smaller the particle, the more surfaces, and the more potential for energy exchange exists. Good to know. This is electricity. It's electric. Everything's trading places. Opposites attract. Things have to move. They're switching at the same exchange rate. If I've got this, pluses on my iron, I have to trade off an awful lot of hydrogen off a root to get that to move in. So there's 4 parts that have to change. Hydrogen is one that might be coming off that root, attaching itself to a soil particle, and then we're going to be able to get some iron up there, but it's going to take some spaces to move all these guys and shuffle them around. So that's why when you see this low CEC soil, what we might say with sand, and in that case, I'm going to pick on sand for a little bit here, we want to feed material to it actually at a lower rate more often. Because if we put too much in there, the bowl can't hold it, and it's got to go somewhere. So clays, with how many more particles and how much more space and how much more surface area, can handle a crap load more at one time. That's the difference. It doesn't necessarily mean that your nutrition changes, that the amount of nutrients over time changes, that your grass need changes, that your corn need changes, that anything else that you're putting down, that doesn't necessarily change. But what you can just dump on it at once does. That one-time effect, okay? So soil particles are negatively charged. Only a few locations in the world where the statement is not true. There is a little video, I don't know if anybody's ever seen it, it's kind of a little animated thing where it talks a little bit about this, but there are apparently some places in the islands that have positively charged soil. It's kind of weird. Somewhere, I don't know, Bermuda Triangle stuff. Look the opposite way. So they're dealing more with anions and cations, and there's just a difference that happens in the soil. So, cations. Nutrients are designed to attach themselves to particles before getting washed away in soil solution. That's the importance. So the more surfaces, again, if we're working with that organic matter and sand, if we have clay is less likely to wash out. One thing that clay is really good at is not letting water in. And once it's in, it's also really good at not letting it out. Because it's so tight, it takes a long time for water to go in there. I will have this number wrong, but I'm going to spit one out anyway. You can fact check it later. The infiltration rate, we have this data somewhere. It's from ATRA. It's really good. Wait, John Riley, are you in here?
Yeah.
Do you have that infiltration rate of water? Is that in that slide?
No, it's not in the.
So I'm just going to throw something out there, and it's something like this. 2 inches an hour in sand
Yep.
can be taken up, something like that. We're talking about like a 1/16 an inch an hour in clay. Okay, so anything over that's running off. That's just infiltration rates of water. So that means that if it's dry, it's less likely to get into solution. I've been here when it's rained like 3 inches while I was standing here looking outside and gone back out, and it's dry. It just goes away. It just goes away. It's all down into the water table. Clay's not that way. That's rolling off the top. So the tighter the soil, the harder for water to get into it. Also, the potential for lockout of all of these other nutrients, because if you start to build on one of them, our calcium gets way too high, or we have so much hydrogen in the soil, it's going to start blocking off other items. This is why with lime, because if you look at a test and your hydrogen is super high, we've got this hydrogen cation, we're going to have to load it with calcium to start getting other exchanges. That hydrogen is taking up all the space, the pH is going to be low, acidity is not going to be a friend, and you're not going to have nutrients working the way that they're supposed to. Okay, so if I have like a soil pH of like a 5.8 and I'm trying to pound it with nitrogen, it's going to take so much more nitrogen to get the same effect as if I had just mildly buffered that up into a 6.5 so that I can actually get the use out of it. Okay, that makes sense? So pH and CEC, very closely related, and ECs, all of this stuff is very closely related when we're talking about the electricity here. Okay? Once a cation has found a soil particle to cling to, it can begin the exchange. The dating begins. Let's see what happens. We're going to exchange numbers. I'm going over here. We're going backwards. We're going to do this kind of thing, okay? It's always a 1-to-1. So if we only have a 1 positive cation, it's going to change with another one. If you have to move something else that's got 2 on it, it's going to require 2 exchange. It only goes like that. You can't exchange 2 for 1. It's always even. Hydrogen will begin to acidify the soil as exchange happens without replenishment. That means if you are not bringing in these other cations, we have hydrogen exuding from roots all the time. All the time. Okay, there is this acid exchange that's happening in the soil. So the plant roots are feeding out hydrogen. So we're going to need to, hold on, can you share that with everybody? All right. It's like, I love cars. So that's what's happening in the soil. So exchange is happening with the hydrogen coming out of the roots. It's exuding into the soil, it's creating acid, and we need to exchange those with other items, get back into the root, feed that plant, get things moving back up. So we want that hydrogen to kick off that plant root and exchange with something else and move. Does that make sense? That's it. Give and take. Give and take all the time. If we load up with too much of something, what happens? We get an imbalance. Nutrients aren't flowing the way that it's supposed to go. Okay? Yes, sir.
So let's say hypothetically you've got soil that's like zinc and calcium and basically multiple items that are deficient.
Mm-hmm.
So is it something that you could basically throw the kitchen sink at it and it takes whatever it needs and then you do it all over again, or should you work on one or two sets first and then?
Great question. Okay. Let's go back to our sort of soil test flow chart. What do we need to look at first? We need to remember pH. Soil pH. That's going to be key. So we need to know, you can throw a ton of zinc at something, but if your pH is somewhere that it shouldn't be, it might not do anything. All right, so we need to make sure that we correct that pH first, right? So as soon as we do that, then we can talk about throwing the kitchen sink at something. Now, most of the time, if you get a soil report, you should know that it's never scary. They're never terrifying. It's not like, oh, the doctor's giving me bad news today. That's not what it is. Congratulations, it's positive. What does that mean? Is it positive good? I don't know. So you have to look at this as a roadmap, and when you're seeing, you always start with that pH side. You start with pH, and you're going to adjust that to make sure that any other things that you're going to put down on the ground are going to adjust it further. Anybody in here who may have sent me soil tests this year, they say, what should I do? I would look at something and say, hey, I would just recommend that anytime you put out a nutrient, it is in a sulfated form this year. I want you to do that this year. Okay, great. So then we would just run down that line. So we're going to run what? Potassium sulfate, we're going to run iron sulfate, magnesium sulfate, anything with it in there that's going to make a difference with that sulfated material. I recommend that to people, okay? And it just depends on how some of these other exchanges are going or how the pH is before you throw the kitchen sink at it. Get a roadmap. Decide it's worth it. I can't stress that enough.
But what I mean is, once you know what it needs, so you know the pH is good.
Yep.
So you're saying basically the soil's negative, so you have to attach positive to it. At what point are you throwing too much shit at it to where you're wasting, or should you work on?
Let's get to that.
Okay.
Sure. Let's do that then. All right. Are we good with this slide? Did we go through this? Good. Let's just keep moving. I do have something that actually talks about that for a second, so you're good job moving us forward. You're welcome. So I appreciate that. I pay him to be here.
I'm a verbal fluffer.
That's right.
See off the pool.
Sum of cations. Total amount of exchangeable ions in the solution. That's what that thing is. It adds up to 100%. It can only ever be 100%. It'll never be 110%. It is only ever 100%. Okay, so if we have highly acidic soil, we're going to see hydrogen percentage being very high. So if it's getting into lower pH and you hand me a soil sample that says 4.8, it's probably going to have a hydrogen level in that base saturation in the like 40–50% range. Calcium is going to be down to nothing. Magnesium is going to be down to nothing. And I'm going to recommend doing what? We're going to have to, right? Because we want to get these things moving. We want to kick that hydrogen out. Kick it out. It's not doing you much good. That's been exuded from a root. Let's get that thing moving out of the way so that we can get nutrients flowing in the correct direction. Is there a hand up? No. Just waving? That's cool. So, does everybody understand? I know I touched on this. I just want to make sure you understand what happens. If I'm adjusting a base saturation level, there can only ever be 100%. Okay, so if I look at a soil test and calcium is like 90%, all right, and magnesium is like 8, and there's a little bit of potassium, it's always going to equal 100, but now my calcium is too high, so I'm going to have to do something about that to change it. So if I add something in, levels will drop. It's never more than 100%, right? It can't be, so something has to give one way or the other. All right? Any questions? You're with me? You're with Matt. All right, we're good? Okay. Higher levels of calcium and magnesium will indicate higher pH, higher hydrogen and lower pH. We've already discussed this. Calcium levels will either carry nutrients to the soil or block them. Anytime, if you start to load stuff up of any nutrient, you're going to block off an O. Okay, if you go too high on something. I do have a story about that, an instance of basically micronutrient toxicity. Okay, I had a company, are they in the room right now? Okay, there's one back there. They ran high levels of 002 for a long time. A long time. Like 2.5 years or something. It was a long time. It was too long. Because in the beginning, they were getting really good color response because they were missing those components. And they liked it. They just kept going and kept going and kept going. And the lawns eventually started to fall off. And then stuff didn't really want to grow. Well, there were two reasons. One, it wasn't really getting any nitrogen at all.
Well, we were running 1001.
Okay, that's right. I got really heavy on that. But there was such a high amount of these miners in there, they didn't need to run it so long. And so we started to build up a bit of a toxicity. And so then the plant roots didn't want to get into the ground, so we had too many minor elements. They were like off the charts. And plants don't like that. So you do have to watch that. You can go over the top, and it doesn't take much. Remember we were talking about boron yesterday? If I go above like 2 pounds to the acre, all of a sudden I'm getting into toxic zones if I kick that up again, right? We don't want to do that. You can do that with zinc, you can do that with iron. If you're doing it with magnesium and things like that, it's just going to dry your soil out. Your roots aren't going to like it very much. If you go too high on sulfur and you're trying to buffer pH for a long time, you can have reactions that way. There are things you can load up. Pretty much any one nutrient in excess will kill it. Any one. Pick one. Let's just figure out how long it's going to take. Right? Okay. Like this slide. All right. Your soil has limits. Know them. It's very important. If you know what your CECs are, if you have taken a soil test at all, it's probably fairly broad in an area that you're dealing with a similar type of soil across a certain zone. It gets pretty easy. So you can design your program on what that soil type is. If you tell me, like, I live in an area where I have very, very low CEC sandy soil, but I only want to fertilize 3 times a year, I'm going to recommend going back to college. You don't want to be in the lawn care business. That's not going to help you. You will be out of business. Don't waste your money. Go do something else. You're going to have to work your program around what your soil can and cannot uptake. But just to kind of look down here, if you take your CEC number, whatever that is, roughly two times that CEC is what you could take per application in nitrogen. Roughly. So if you have high CE soil, you have the capacity to run out at a pound, pound and a half, 2 pounds of N, and I know plenty of companies that do it. In areas that have 35, 36 CEC, they'll run out and throw out 2 pounds of N, they don't care. Like, urea, nobody cares. Just flood it. And the soil will actually take it. Because it can. It's got the space, it can handle that. But if you're in sand and you've got 4, 5, 6, 7 CEC readings, you can't do much more than a 1/4 pound of N at a time that's getting used up, that's actually getting and functionally used by the plant through the soil interaction. It's actually why a lot of people down here have had so much success just purely running liquid. You don't put a whole lot of nitrogen out. Most of it gets absorbed into the leaf tissue, and then, you know, we're not really worried about the sand. We're just being able to hit that plant right through the tissue, and that makes a big difference. Okay? You guys with me on that? This making sense? You heard this before? Quiet. It's good.
What is the average CEC down here, John?
What's that?
What is the average CEC down here?
Down here, average, I can't really say there is one, but let's say a lot of, between 4 and 10. 4 to 10. And now I've seen areas through the Carolinas where, again, you would think that you have heavy red clay, but you just have high iron content, where it's like a 7 to 8. And I've had to call people and say, hey, I thought you lived, you know, in this zone. Like, I do. I said, well, when you dig into your soil, is it kind of coarse? And said, yeah, it's that heavy red clay. Like, that's not heavy red clay, that's just red sand, right? It's a larger particle, it's not a weathered soil. That's all that means, right? But it's full of iron, it's full of ferric iron, and it gives it that red look. You can really tell the difference. I mean, like, when I was a kid, I grew up in Houston, I had a lot of clay down there, right? If I went down and played at the lake and we were getting, I could, you know, scoop the crap off the bottom and roll it into a ball and set it on the little lake wall, and it would turn into a hard rock, solid. That was clay, and it was a lot of it, and it was slimy, and you didn't want to get your, you know, 4-wheel drive anywhere near it if it had, you know, been saturated for a while. You get that gumbo mud that's just full of clay. A lot of silt in that, right? So that's some of that washout into the Gulf. You can really geographically figure things out pretty easily on how the soil type is going to be. Where I live in the mountains, we're running 20s for CEC. Actually, Jeremy, do you remember what yours was on your test?
My CEC was 20.3.
Yeah, okay, and actually his soil looks pretty good, right? It looks like topsoil. It's something that you would want to see. If you lived in the south somewhere, that's what you are looking for, is what kind of what we deal with in this zone. Now, a lot of that is because the mountain shot up, and any soil that was there washed into the valleys, right? That's all that happened. All of the topsoil that was there before moved down into the lower levels, and that's it. That's why you're looking at the Great Plains, anything that shot up off the Rockies, it all fell down a certain way, you've got better topsoil, that's what's there. So that could have clay content, but mainly it's just this nice loamy soil. It's got a good combination of everything, splits it right down the middle, a little clay, a little sand, everything's in there. And stuff grows really, really well. But our growing season doesn't support the type of soil that we have because it's short. You know, so we're not really able to utilize that as much as other people could if it was in a different zone. So that's just our area. But I know that soil really well because I've been digging in it most of my life, or getting something stuck somewhere and getting it out. Some sort of extraction has taken place in that soil quite a few times.
Yep.
Some soils require more frequent, less input programs. That's what I was talking about earlier. There's a lot of companies down here that run monthly programs. If you live in Georgia, you probably don't need to run a monthly program. There's really no reason to. You can make ammonium sulfate with nothing connected to it last 45 days. You don't have to do anything. It doesn't cost you anything. But you go somewhere else, That ain't gonna work. Maybe you get 30. There's other places you might get like 21. But some soils will allow you to do it without buffering or putting any sort of inhibitor on there because you can get a longer term feeding. And oftentimes it is that heavier soil. As long as you're getting good water penetration and materials going in there and your pH is corrected, you can make just a regular fert with nothing attached to it last as long as guys that are paying way extra for controlled release. Now, as you add organic matter, enough out of you, you're going to get that even better. Can CEC be manipulated? Yes. Does that mean it's going to change on your soil report? Not really, because that is just the sum of your soil. It's always going to be made up of sand, but if we start to fill in with these carbon components, okay, so again, I'm going to talk about two different things here. There is carbon, and there's carbohydrates. There are different things that happen in order to create this. This is going to be your humic, your biochar, your ash. This is dead and spent carbon. This is just loads and loads of soil surface area. This just gives me a lot more spaces for things to cling and move and connect to, right? That's what that is. So if I have a much larger particle here, say this box, and this is the sand particle, and this is my carbon that I'm adding in, the surface area on these things is getting absolutely massive compared to this. And now I have all of this that I get to connect to, and I don't lose much in the water soil solution that could leach away. Follow me?
You're just filling gaps.
Filling gaps. We're just plugging it in. We want that space. That's what we're getting to. We need that space. So yes, in a sense, it can be manipulated, but it will not change your soil from sand to clay. Right? We can't do that. We could do that. Take it all out of the ground, run it through a pulverizer and put it back. I don't think anybody needs to do that. It'd be a hell of a business. Like, you know, I'm in the CEC change. It's going to cost you $42 million to get rid of that thing. Organic matter is your friend. This is actually the last slide that I have on here, so you're lucky. I wanted to leave room for questions on this, plus a couple comments to follow. But check this out. Holding capacity, you're only at 25 times that of sand. Okay, that's why sand needs it. Sand needs its friend. It needs to have the organic matter in there because it's going to catch it. It's working as a net. It's a safety net. In your clay, in your finer, more eroded soils that can get bound up. See, we don't get bind-ups in sandy soils. You don't really get that. You will see nutrients that get really high, and typically, like in some of these southern, like southeastern regions, it is that iron thing. I'm talking about iron a lot. Ferric iron will kind of start to bind up the soil. It gets too high. It's a metal. It's in there. It doesn't like to move. So you have to use a chemical reaction to start to flush it. So that's why we use a lot, like I see these results with the aerate in those soils. They see this iron start to convert, flush back up. That's why. So we're releasing that, just releasing it, making it plant available. And if you have, this question came up earlier, if you've got, 1,300 parts per million of iron in a soil area, I am never going to be able to get rid of that for you, but I can actually start leaking it up into the plant, and it'll keep going much longer than we're here. We'll never get to the bottom of that, ever. Okay? Humus is naturally on the acidic side. That hydrogen exchange is happening from roots. It's naturally pushing these acids out. That means that since it is sort of a more carbohydrate-based system, it is naturally acidic. It's naturally acidic. So over time, it will naturally acidify the soil. Now it finds its own tipping point. There are certain things that find this sort of homeostasis equilibrium thing. And this is one of them. You tend to end up in a very rich organic matter soil right around 6.8 to 7 pH. It just sort of naturally goes that way. Whether you started from an acidic side, bringing this material in, and having all these exchange sites and all this electricity happening and everything moving, you'll actually see pH shift upwards as time goes on, even in those heavy clays, as it begins to open and unlock and more organic matter takes its place. Water holding, nutrient holding, nitrogen, phosphorus stability, oxygenation, all benefit CECs directly. So, this is a topic that gets hit on, and we try to figure out how to make it apply to our businesses, because you get worried. There's a lot of information that I talk about, and other people talk about, it's just information. That's all you need to keep it as, it's just information. You need never be concerned with numbers like that on your soil test, except you know that it's a roadmap, and you just need to be thinking about things in terms of electricity and connectivity, and how things are going to interact from sort of a staticky clinging way, right? One thing that can, you know how nitrogen fixes through lightning, through the energy, right? We know how this works. Around the world, about 6 pounds of nitrogen per acre fall via rain per acre every year. That's about average, about 6 pounds. Areas that get lots of rainfall, Florida's probably getting more like 12 or 13 pounds of free nitrogen every year from thunderstorms and rainfall. Just comes down per acre. It's not a ton, but it's something. Now I want you to think about that. It's carrying a charge, right? It's got this electrostatic charge. If we have soil that can accept that charge, we get a response on the turf. Okay? I don't know how many people in here have recognized this yet, but you know, they'll ask me, can I apply this in a rainstorm? Can we do the program? Yeah, just get out there and do it and watch what happens. If you get our products out and it rains that afternoon and go look at it that after the grass has changed. Has anybody ever seen that? It happens. And it happens immediately because there's been a firing and a change that's going on in the soil where we have this capacity for the charges to work, and it stands the grass up. That happens. It happens a lot. It's one of the coolest things you'll ever see. It's like literally you go treat a lawn and a little thunderstorm comes through and you're driving back by and go like, what the hell happened? It's darker, it's like standing up, it's electric. And so we want to be able to use that as well. We want to have these charges happening so we can accept what nature gives us, right? That's all coming from this. Increasing that cation exchange through carbon, through organic matter, the humus building up, all of that stuff. That's where that's actually coming from. Follow? Does anybody have any questions?
I got a question. So, with the CEC, I get the concept of sand and clay.
Yes.
Where does silt fall into?
Right in the middle.
Right. Does it have any? So CEC going from say 7 to 12.
Mm-hmm.
Does this, if you were physically manipulating the soil, would the silt change it from 7 to 12?
Okay, so that's a good question. If you were to re-aggregate your soil, if you were to change, like if you had a lot of heavy clay and you decided I don't like clay anymore, so I'm going to go put tons and tons of sand down, you are going to have an effect on your soil because you've changed the particle sizes.
Right.
It's just particle sizes.
But is it the sand that's doing that? Like if you're adding silt in there, would that have any effect?
Same thing. It's the same thing.
Just
It doesn't really make a difference. You're just thinking about things inside of this is one size and this is another size. Okay, so this is represented by a small number and this is represented by a big number.
So a finer particle of sand would be higher on the CEC than a larger particle.
Because, okay, you can take it in, like say this square space right here like this, okay? If I have just one piece that fits inside there, I'm going to have the lowest reading.
Right.
But if I have this same area and I have 100 pieces in it, I get a much higher reading.
It's all rocks.
It's all rocks.
It's all rocks.
It's just, it's weathering is what it is.
Okay, so it's not the fact that it's sand or clay, it's the
Particle size.
of it. Okay, that makes
Does that make sense?
sense.
It really has, it's no judgment to your soil. I mean, I've had these conversations where people are really upset. Like, my CECs are so low. I'm like, tell them they're nice. Maybe it'll work them up. But you don't worry about it. Like, what's the big deal? All it did was tell you what it is. And it's a boy. So worried. It doesn't matter. We just adapt our programs to it. Right? That's really what it is. So, you know, I can run a way better liquid program on a much lower CEC soil because I'm getting a whole lot more leaf contact and less reliance upon the sand to transfer things back and forth. I can do it very, very easily. Where you could go and run a granular program on heavy clay, and honestly, it's gonna sit there a while. It takes even longer to break down. Because like I said, this infiltration rate of water takes forever for that prill to break apart and get down, and you can lose it. So that becomes the issue of, so just because you can, should you? If I had heavy clay and I'm like, I can totally put out 2 pounds of in on this, should you? What's the risk in that? In general, anybody, what's the risk in doing that? Runoff. Runoff. Actually, in atmospheric, you're going to get a lot of volatilization if you do that. So there's no real reason to do it. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? But I do know plenty of companies that I've looked at their programs and said, okay, you're putting down 2 pounds of in round 1, 2 pounds of in round 2, a pound in round 3. What the hell? Why? You guys have already put out more nitrogen across your customer base than the whole state of Florida. You know, like that's ridiculous. So what was the point of that? It was just like, no, we're just gonna nail it. We're gonna get this stuff flushed. And we don't really care how much is running off because we're putting the cheapest stuff down anyway. Okay, all right, that's your business model and that's your business. If you do that, that's fine, but you don't need to. You don't need to. You're not really doing anybody else any favors. Okay? So be thinking about that. Just be thinking about that. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Yes?
So I got a soil test back. I thought it was clay soil. pH is 4.9. Recommendations for adding phosphorus, boron, potassium. You're saying start with the pH?
How high is the iron on that? Is there a chart?
Iron is 180 parts per million.
Is it red?
Well, it shows very high green.
It's green. Very high. Yeah.
So if we start with the pH, are we gonna go, because I know as we fix the pH, it starts to correct other things.
Yes, it does.
But does that mean we ignore the other recommendations and we wait, or can we?
No, you can start working on that too, but there's a part of that, you know, if you start putting out these other minor elements, you're probably not gonna get the kick that you would. So you would hit it with the pH correction, and then you can start loading in those other things. But, you know, some of these minor elements are very stable, and they'll just sit around. The plant can only take what it can take, and it's going to choose what it takes whenever it chooses to take it. So the soil is a roadmap, and all we're doing is sort of filling up enough of a buffet that when the plant gets hungry, it takes what it wants. I may want meat today and grapes tomorrow. It's going to pull what it wants when it needs it based on its own deficiencies. Okay? Benny. Okay, so he's got a lawn that's all crazy and bleached out. The thing's bizarre. It's like a weird, I don't know, medical mystery. So he sent me soil and tissue analysis on this lawn.
I didn't say you were diseased though, right? 'Cause it doesn't matter.
No, it didn't matter. Okay, it's just a bizarre lawn, right? It's just sort of bleached. It grows, okay? The roots are deep and growing.
I've got white roots, I mean, that long.
Yeah, but it's weird looking. That's all I can say. It's just weird looking. So he sent me the stuff, and there's really only like one correlating factor between the tissue and the soil, and that it was super low on K. That was really it. The rest of it had like little low spots.
High iron, because I've been beating it down with everything. So,
Load.
you want me to give them the backstory?
Yeah, tell the story. It's a good
So-
story. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, it has yet to have a happy ending.
Yeah.
We're not there yet. The jury's out on what we've done is going to work.
So I take the, instead of my big, nice lawn sign, I take the little sign and write my name on it real small.
It's a business card.
Nobody knows. So the lawn was put down in June, new construction, St. Augustine, yeah. Basically in Florida, my normal, what we always done, as soon as it gets late, fungicide, insecticide, because it's coming in, pinch bugs, it's coming in with disease, so we start there. I've applied tons of product to this yard. I've put some of John's products, sprayable products, granular products. I put 2100 at 1.5 pounds per 1,000 solid green ammonium sulfate. I've put ferrous iron on it, like to the point where you're going to turn the yard black. didn't change it. I've put Let's Go T&O on it at 4 times the rate, nothing. I've put 21,714 Yara Milla, ammonium nitrate, nothing. I've put 1801 Green Punch, I've put Aerate, I've put RGS, I've
Everything.
put,
Talk about the kitchen sink.
Customer happy, it's your own.
They're still there.
they're still paying.
Yeah, okay, now, I would make some observations about this place.
Oh, wait, hold on,
All right.
then we put Dolominic,
Yep, we did adjust, pH we adjusted.
Dolominic limestone, we pounded it with
Okay,
K.
yeah, a lot.
And, well, we did MOP
Yep,
plus K-Mag.
yep.
Is this a black line?
They have irrigation.
Everybody's got. So, it's, okay, it's interesting. We don't, this is all very interesting, it's interesting stuff, but the one thing I can tell you is this, so he had a soil and tissue analysis done. Now, oftentimes, soil and tissue tell 2 very different stories. If people have done tissue analysis, you look at it and like, all of this looks fine. You know, again, helpful chart, there's one that's on there to show stuff. On that one, the K was very low. His leaf tissue was showing low K. His soil was also showing low K. And because it was colder and we were taking advantage of maybe a little bit of rain, I just told him to nail it with MOP. I did that on purpose because he was already showing a surplus in this acidic side, and why not? Let's just see if we can hit it with something that's very alkaline. And so we threw that out there. Then it got frost. And now we don't know. Now we wait.
And if you're familiar with the turf fuel line, I put 1420 quick green on it. Nothing.
Nothing. But we didn't do a corrective K until all of that stuff has already been out there. So that's what we're gonna find out. That's why I said there's no happy ending on this, but this is a science project that is ongoing right now. But once we have the data, the roadmap, right?
And this is not common.
No.
In our area. Kevin's in my area, like, you know,
What's that
not
area?
in my competition, because Kevin's got
What area?
Is it like-
Lakeland. I'm 40 miles to the west.
Do the neighbors look the same?
Oh, okay. So yes, if you look through, like right now, everything looks the same.
Everything looks the same after the frost, but, so sod was brought in from different fields, so that kind of changes things too.
Yep. And you
Because
could see
the retention-
immediately where the line was.
the retention pond was sodded with different sod, and there's a line of green.
Yep. It's bizarre.
Water source issue.
No, it's not.
City water.
No, I'm telling you guys, this one is awesome. And I want to see it succeed so bad, and we're just running through this
We can
process.
usually jump it, there's sod, we can
The
jump.
sod that's left on their farm didn't look like.
I didn't go out to their farm, because the sod farm that they get sod from, he's the cheapest around. And Kevin knows if you got one at his yard, you just bump it with a little extra end, and it'll
It'll
go.
coast down.
Have you tried calling the soccer farm to come out? Look
He
at it.
he doesn't, look, put it this way, this guy, the sod farm, he sent one of his guys to a customer's house one day to talk to them. And she's like, oh, I know Travis, we went to high school together, you know, is he gonna fix my yard and replace it? And the tech, or, you know, I call him tech, whatever, his field manager, has got Travis on speakerphone, he goes, F that lady, and, yeah, then.
Never liked her.
He doesn't care. I don't know if there's anything else I've done. I mean, aside from, so I've put Zoxy on it and a couple
Yeah.
fungicides just to be safe.
So on that, you would have started with the potassium,
Maybe.
maybe.
That's what, so
Oh, no, I did put,
you put a little bit out.
I put, 0028 potassium acetate.
And I told him that's not good for soil.
And I put 0026, phosphite.
Right. Also, no good for soil. It's true, but that's typically recommended. So, well, let's talk about that for a second. I know we're kind of a little off topic about that, but when you're looking at like liquid, like potassium acetate or phosphite or any of those things, you're not getting enough active to really make any sort of dent in anything. If he's got a 100-pound deficiency in his potassium, and he's gonna try to do it with potassium acetate, it's gonna cost him somewhere around like, I don't know, $4,000, $1,000, if that's where he needs to be.
Might as well just replace the grass.
Right, but why would you do that? Because that's not for corrective. You can do it with SOP or MOP for, you know, pennies, and you get the active.
And the soils went to 3 different labs just to,
See, yeah. Yeah.
and they were all
Yeah.
done.
Yeah, and that was really the thing. We're looking at K. We're
And
looking
in
at K.
their standard recommendation, 4 to 5 pounds.
4 to 5 pounds of N, pound of phos, 2
How long
pounds
ago
of
did they go
K.
down?
What's that?
How long ago did they go down?
We did that 2 months ago?
MOP.
Yeah, 2 months. December or January? He's got that. He takes care of it.
Once you start seeing results
Either
with
way,
that
we'll find
position.
out maybe.
So, it got cold.
Something's gonna happen.
All right, St. Augustine doesn't really like the cold. In the middle of the state, it froze. It's gonna take a little while to come out of it. Really active growing is gonna start here pretty quick, where it's gonna just have to kick out, or
We
it's
don't
not
know,
gonna do
within
anything.
a month probably.
Yeah, I mean, we should be seeing it. It's gonna be due for a feeding. It's gonna be in here pretty soon. So he's still gonna have to do it, and apparently the customer's just along for the ride. But I asked him before, when he called me and he said, I've got this lawn, and he sent me a picture, I was like, oh, that looks weird, it's just kind of a weird color. It's like, if anybody's seen St. Augustine, let's see if I can pick a color. Like, let's say it's supposed to be the color of your shirt, David, but it doesn't look like that. It looks more like this green right here. It's more like that, it's just bleached.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
Complete
It looks
chlorotic.
chlorotic.
It looks like it needs iron, but iron is not changing.
It's got weird
Yeah.
spots,
Looks like the
kind
whole,
of green.
looks like the whole yard's getting picked all. Like,
That's what it is, there's no fungus.
Yeah, the whole lot is getting picked.
Yeah.
At the same time.
But that's not it.
Yeah,
So
that
we're
was-
going through
that
this
was-
process, and I hope to update everybody that, hey, we went through the process and it did what it was supposed to. But this is just, is this newer neighborhood?
Yeah, it's a new neighborhood, so they're stamping houses out in it.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about maybe the soil came
Yep.
from the bottom of the retention pond.
Likely.
That's next door.
Yep, likely. And so it just takes more to load that up to get it going. So oftentimes, when we get a soil that comes out of a canal or that's buried up, I talked about this a little bit, it's very tight, it's very anaerobic, and stuff doesn't like to go into it. And like these guys said, most of the time, if you just get this started, you can hit it with extra nitrogen to get it up to speed and then get it on cruise control. Well, we're seeing more and more places like that down here, where they are just planting and grass is just like, I don't think I belong here. So that's interesting, and it's causing, for me, it's sort of exciting. You know, like I get to be like, oh, you know, we're gonna play with this.
I'll post
Yeah.
on the Facebook page, I'll post a picture of what it looks like when we started and
What it
there's
looks
really
like
no
after.
change, I mean.
Nah, this is kind of,
I'll post a picture, it's got awesome roots, it really, for the area, I think it's got good roots, and they're tacked down because, my sales rep from Residex went out there and took a sample himself, just, whatever, he wanted to stop by and check it out in person.
yeah.
And he's like, you know, those roots are there. You know, it's not just pulling up, you know, they're not tacking, no, it's got roots.
Yep. All right, yes, go ahead.
Any herbicide on it, or?
Absolutely
Not.
not.
Okay, just been.
No, that's the only category of product we haven't touched.
Is that right?
I mean, I may throw some on there just to see. if-
I've seen
So
some,
it just turns it green.
depends on what they do in the field, and you put something on there.
Jump started.
Yeah, that's all I need. Anybody else have any other questions about this? Are we feeling like we know what we're talking about when we're talking about CEC? Are you feeling comfortable now, not sad about your soil size? Yes, Corey.
Why do people with high pH soils apply so much water?
Why? Great question. I don't know.
I've asked that for years and never got an answer.
I don't know. What's interesting about that is, you know, you could apply gypsum. You could go the other way. That doesn't really have any sort of positive, you know, doesn't move things upward. That will actually open things up. That would make more sense. That would be, if maybe they're seeing like their calcium is low in the soil and they're hoping for the best there, But there are some, depending on your area, you might have a good growth zone on your turf at like 7.8 pH. You know, so they want it higher. Because I have seen labs where I've gotten tests back where it's a 7.2 pH and their line recommendation is 25 pounds. I've seen that before, which is interesting. But it isn't the calcium that was contributing to the pH. That actually wasn't the problem. It was other items in there that were carrying it, like with higher salt contents and stuff. And if you get enough calcium in there, you get more porosity of the soil and it flushes. So that could be why, but oftentimes it's just like they're selling you something. Yeah, oftentimes.
On a low pH, when you have, say, low magnesium and low sulfur,
Sometimes.
are you, would dolomitic or
Okay.
gypsum, or alternate between the two?
There's a range.
And I know which ones you pick and why, but if you have two deficiencies aside from calcium, you do half and half, or?
Oh, no, so
alternate?
again, you would go with what you need to adjust the soil pH first. Okay, and then if you needed to add something in, like extra magnesium or something like that, you can put that in your program.
Right, but I'm saying like in dolomitic lime,
Right?
it has magnesium,
Yes.
so to have, and then the gypsum has the sulfur.
Yes, and
Found
calcitic
low
has
magnesium
pretty much
and
nothing.
sulfur as well as low pH. You do half your lime in dolomitic and the other half in gypsum.
No, I probably wouldn't do that. I would just bring the whole thing up and then start using sulfated materials to feed it. That's what I would do in that scenario. Yes, look at it, see?
Give me something good and sarcastic to say to a customer.
You got it, you read it.
Who says, well, you're applying these humates and humic acid and you're adding carbon to my soil. It's gonna get to a point where I don't need you anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
My response would be,
There's plenty of other reasons to fire you. Soil changes take a long time. The beauty of doing what we're doing is that it's going to put less stress on you as an operator. You know, people want to have that beautiful lawn. They want it to grow and to be something very special. They're hiring you to manage that. Oftentimes, they don't give a rat's ass what you're putting on it. If a customer said to you what you just said, I would say stop talking about it. Well, eventually, since you're putting so much carbon down, like, what? Nobody says that. They say, thanks for doing a good job, but they're gonna fire you if they feel like it's been good for a long time anyway. That happens. Like, I think it's doing just fine. What do I need you for? Most of the time, you get fired on the guy that you fix.
it happened once.
Once? Yeah, stop talking about it.
How do you know you put humic?
That's right. Only give answers to questions asked. Don't give too much information. You'll get asked more questions. Weren't you ever a kid?
Yes, tell them RGF.
Yeah, that's it. Any other questions? Yes, Richard.
Riding the Wayback Machine, I remember a couple of years ago, you spoke about soil tests in a way where you're like,
I hate that.
I walked out of the room and I was like, no, we're still gonna keep doing some.
Yes,
So what was the genesis of, like, this is totally different than where you were?
good question. I was angry. I'm gonna tell you. Here's why. No, I still am. And if you ask any guys that I talk to at labs, they get it. They get why I'm angry. I'm angry because of the sales of fertilizer for soil tests. And I don't trust it. That's it. So I do. I rally against it. I want the roadmap, but I don't want you guys getting a soil test and just putting out the same thing that it's a waste of money. If you're just gonna follow along with the land-grant university recommendations, don't waste your money. I was mad at the industry, not at the labs, but at the model. And I still am. I'm angry and I don't care who knows it. But I know you have to get a roadmap. So what I ask for myself is please don't put any recommendations on this. Just don't, because I'm getting mad. And I'll look at them and go, this son of a, you know, I just don't want to see it. Because I want to be able to look and see what the soil really needs, not what they want to sell me. And I really don't like the ones that say, you know, apply a 25-12-12, start that right away. It's like, that's pretty specific when it has nothing to do with what's on the paper. Right? I don't like that. So yes, I was angry. That's why I talked about that little, I think there's a comic strip in there. And like how you related to that as well. You know what I'm talking about. I don't like that. So I was. Soil testing, in my opinion, is just a place to put your money when you have extra. If you're not gonna change your program. What's that? Oh, I don't have time now. I got, do we? Yeah. I don't have to find it.
You know
Let me see if I can find this thing real quick.
Your best friend's hair and stuck it to a wall? Well, a similar phenomenon occurs in soil. Through their electrostatic energy, nutrients cling on to clay particle surfaces. Nutrients like calcium, magnesium, potassium, and ammonium are all positively charged chemicals, or cations. And as it turns out, most clay particles and organic matter in soil are negatively charged. So, many nutrients are positive and particles are negative. Perfect. In chemistry, as in romance, opposites attract. Good. No more leaching. But like the balloon on the wall, the nutrients are only temporarily held. In fact, there's actually a shell of water molecules that forms around the cation, preventing it from bonding permanently. This shell is often called a hydration sphere, but that's a whole other video. So, back to cations. Basically, if a plant wants a nutritious cation like potassium, you'll need to exchange it for another cation or cations of equal charge. Luckily, plants produce hydrogen cations that they can exchange. One hydrogen cation for one potassium cation. Easy enough. But for nutrients with a positive charge of 2, like calcium, 2 hydrogen cations are needed. The higher the positive charge, the harder it gets to exchange or trade cations. That's because a cation with high positive charge and small size is preferentially held by the soil over those with lower charge or larger size, meaning that a large cation with a positive charge of 1 will be the first to be released. A divalent cation having a charge of 2 will be released more easily than a cation with a positive charge of 3. Whether they're held tightly or not, the nutrients are available to the plant in exchange for other cations. Not all nutrients are cations, however. Some are actually negatively charged compounds, or anions. Since anions, like nitrate or sulfate, have a negative charge, they are unable to attach themselves to negatively charged particles, and as a result, leach out when watered. Of course, all soils are different. There are soils in the tropics, for example, that have positively charged soil particles. And in that case, it's the anions, not cations, that are held temporarily and then exchanged with other anions. Most soils, however, have negatively charged particles. The more negatively charged the soil is and the more surface area a soil has, the more cation exchange capacity it has. This is such an important fact that scientists measure a soil's cation exchange capacity, CEC, in order to help farmers determine how much and how often fertilization is needed. That's because CEC is sort of like a cup size at a fast food joint. Some soils are supersized, but others have a kitty cup. Pouring too much will just cause a mess, but if you refill several times, you can still quench your thirst. Farming in low CEC soils works almost the same way. Even though the soil has lower capacity, you can fertilize more often using smaller amounts, and the plants will grow healthy and strong. And it's a good thing, too. Otherwise, little land to farm. So the fact that farmers can grow crops almost anywhere kind of seems like superhero powers. But really, it's just knowing about chemistry.
Chemistry. All right, class, do you have any questions about this video that we should have played? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But I had to save the cartoon for the end. I have an hour to film.
You watching the other one now?
Which
You
other
just
one?
had the cartoon.
Oh, absorptions? We just watch videos. It's down. Let's do this.
I was more college. It was awesome.
It was awesome. We watched videos all day.
Hey,
So,
Matt,
I do like that.
How do you,
It's very simple.
do a
It's
chat?
easy to follow. You can share
How do you
that
write a chat?
with, your text or whatever. It's just kind of fun to watch, and it'll help. Does that really mean that you're gonna be able to understand how to change your base saturations or anything like that? You know, I had to talk, I'm sorry.